Well, hello and welcome again to Whisky and Cynicism. I'm Simon Smith, as hopefully you know by now. I'm joined today by someone probably for the first time from someone in North America, in Oregon, who's escaped up into the mountains for this turbulent time that we're all in, and someone who is fiercely aligned to the agave category. So I'm really looking forward to delving into that. But before we go any further, Jesse, welcome along. How are you? And have you got a dram in front of you, or is it still coffee time for you?
I'm doing well, man. It is actually still coffee, but give it a few hours. It's 11 a.m. here. Give it a few hours, and I've got my Ocho limited edition red bottle ready to open. And having just done dry January, obviously, I'm ready now in February to get back into the tequila.
Well, I'm glad I caught you on the first. It's good timing because you celebrate leaving dry January. Well, I've got a Tommy's in front of me. I often do these the other way around to Australia where it's morning for me, but as it's night time, I'm going to have a Tommy's and enjoy some Ocho in that form. So cheers, mate. So I guess, for anyone who's not aware, Jesse, you've literally got agave or tequila in your blood, for your wonderful father, Thomas, who I was lucky enough to meet a couple of years ago. His achievements in the agave industry are huge and very lengthy, and of course yours echo them. So having seen and grown up around agave and obviously been part of it for a very long time, what's the biggest change or development you've seen in the agave industry? And I guess it's either its production at home or its perception around the world.
Yeah, really good question, Simon. I think there's two things that come to mind is really in the last, say, 20 years. So, since the early 2000s, we've seen a huge move towards industrialization, especially with the bigger brands. So, less of those traditional production methods and more kind of really upscaling like diffusers and autoclaves and, 200,000 liter fermenters, which is kind of inevitable with a growing category like tequila. And we're very lucky that it is growing at the pace that it is. And then, there's also a move towards consolidation. So we've seen all the big companies, the big players, spirits companies get involved in tequila in the last 20 years, Bacardi and Brown-Forman buying Patron and Herradura as an example. And also, this change towards kind of the perception, which I think has been helped by this trend in like celebrity brands and, Clooney selling Casamigos for, almost $1 billion in total, which is crazy, in terms of valuation. But it's really gotten through to the final consumer that, okay, tequila is not really that slammer that I had in school or in uni years ago. It's actually evolved into something else. And of course, we in the industry have known that for a long time, but I think the final consumer is starting to see that. And I think that's one of the positive upshots of having these celebrity brands coming out is that people actually say, oh, well, if George Clooney's drinking it or The Rock or whoever it is, and endorsing this tequila, then, maybe I should give it a try.
Yeah, it's always a two-edged sword with growth and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, it does open up to a new market. And when you say things getting bigger, I mean, I guess to digress a little bit with Ocho, you're talking single farm tequila. And I guess before we go any further, maybe you could explain what that is, but also give anyone at home just a quick rundown on what agave actually is, because there might be some people who aren't really aware of what that primary product is.
Yeah, and actually, let me grab, because I know you have some listeners in Oz. So I've actually got the Australian packaging here, which looks a bit different, the US packaging and Australia packaging compared to the European packaging. But agave is, if we can picture kind of like an aloe plant, most people can kind of imagine that. Long, spiky leaves, kind of the blue agave, which is the only variety allowed to be used by law for tequila production, has a kind of bluish tinge to the leaves, hence the name. So agave tends to be kind of green, but blue agave has these bluer leaves to it, kind of almost like a turquoise color, bluish green. But what agave it is not a cactus like many people think. It's actually part of the lily order of plants. So lily, like the flower. It's more closely related to things like the asparagus or the yucca, even the pineapple, than it is the cactus. So it's a very unique plant, and I do talk for hours just about this plant. It really is, for a raw material, it's unlike anything else. It's so different from something like grapes for brandies, or any other fruit for fruit brandies, grain for whiskeys and vodkas. It's really, really unique. And the blue agave takes an average of 8 years to grow to full maturity. And that's 8 years of, these plants soaking up minerals from the soil and nutrients from the soil through their roots, and storing those in their piña, the center of the plant, the core of the plant, which we call a piña. And the leaves are like natural solar panels stretched out towards the sun. And they absorb the sun's energy and again store them in the piña in the form of complex fructan chains. So of course, sugar, we all know sugars are important because they create alcohol. And this is a really unique type of sugar or complex carbohydrate that's stored in this plant. And I don't know about you, I know you talk a lot about whiskey. I love whiskey, but after dinner, I'll have, a couple of 2-3 drams of whiskey, and I'm pretty chilled out. I'm kind of like a little bit sleepy, ready for bed. If I have 2 or 3 tequilas after dinner, man, I'll be up all night, man. So it's to me, it's that energy that I get from tequila is really from those 8 years on average of soaking up the sun's energy. And I can feel that energy when I drink it. So I don't know if anyone listening has had that experience, but I certainly have. So it's a very unique plant. It's a very unique raw material to create a spirit from, whether it be tequila or mezcal, bacanorras. Well, sotol is not technically from agave, but very, very similar. Raicilla. There's all these different types of agave spirits found in Mexico.
It's interesting you say that about the energy. And I mean, this is called Whiskey and Cynicism, and many people might be waiting for me to say, bullshit, there's no way tequila gives you energy. And I was of the exact same opinion until one night in Sydney, maybe 7 years ago. A lad had some, it was probably one of the first times I'd drunk in quantity and certainly very good quality. And it was actually mezcal. And he said to me, look, man, this is kind of going to give you a bit of a boost, because it was single estate, was kind of wild agave mezcal. And I kind of went, no, it's not. I'm about ready to go home. I'm going to have 2 tequilas and I'm going to want to go home even more. And it was about 5 hours later, I was in a club somewhere. And, and it really did. And the next day felt absolutely amazing. And until then, I would have been as cynical as anyone else. But it is a very, very different intoxication, I guess, that you get compared to something like whiskey.
Yeah. And again, what you said is, I've heard a lot of people who know more about alcohol than I do scientifically that just say ethanol is ethanol is ethanol. And it doesn't produce a different effect. But for me, my personal experience, that's absolutely not true. If I drink gin versus rum versus tequila versus whiskey, it's a different feeling. It's a different inebriation or intoxication, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ethanol, that's an old argument, kind of your logical heart wants to go out to, but when you experience these different things, and you've got to kind of go with it. And kind of moving on. So when you talk about the kind of importance of all that 8+ years, 8 to, I guess 12 or 15 years, it could be for agaves, soaking up all that, unlike with a lot of other spirits we look at, and especially in whiskey and the Scotch whiskey world, you're talking about terroir then at that point, and especially with Ocho, you're talking about single farm. Do you think that's a kind of a part of agave and tequila production that's important, and will be looked at more and more as we move forward?
Yeah, thanks for, again, great question, Simon. I think this is a trend that, I'm trying not to sound too full of ourselves here, but this is really a trend that we started in tequila. There was no such thing as single field tequila before we started Tequila Ocho. And there was a very kind of basic, if any, almost non-existent understanding of what the real effects of terroir were in tequila. So for me, it's been a great experiment. And so again, just to show you the bottle here, here's the name of the field, Cerro Grande, and the year of harvest, in this case, 2020, a year we're just going to strike from the history books, I hope. And then Los Patos here is, different packaging, same exact liquid, 2016 in this case. And again, this is the Australian or US packaging. We've got it there at the bottom as well. So if you go on our website, you can see we've harvested 25 different fields to date. You can click on each one, see photos, the elevation of that field, the orientation towards the sun, the soil type. Now we're taking even more kind of geeky readings like pH of the soil. We're really taking a lot more detailed study of the field in more recent harvests. But, the interesting thing is you can try these are especially the Blancos. I really, we do these vertical tastings primarily with the Blancos, comparative tastings, because the wood has its own influence. It's an added factor. But if we really keep it to, you know, the same production process that we've used for these 25 different harvests, and they are all noticeably Ocho. You taste it and you go, yeah, this is Ocho Blanco. But when you really taste them side by side, you say, wow, this one has more, you know, floral notes, the kind of like jasmine and lavender. And this one's much more herbaceous, like eucalyptus and menthol. And then you try another field, another harvest, and you're like, wow, this is so earthy. You know, this is really just mineral and kind of a little bit of that rough earthiness. And every field will be a slightly different. So like siblings in a family, they'll all share the same DNA, and yet they'll all have their own unique characteristics. And that's what we love about Tequila Ocho, is it's always made extremely well, very traditionally. And it's always going to taste good, but it's going to taste a little bit different batch to batch. And that's what we love about it. So that's really like, if you think about a single vineyard wine, everyone who drinks wine knows that two adjacent fields owned by the same grower and same producer, growing the same exact type of grapes, variety of grapes, if they produce two different single field wines of those two different vineyards side by side, they are going to taste different. You know, and that's something that's been understood in wine for hundreds of years. And this is something very new for tequila. So we're very pleased that, you know, the amount of tequilas that now say single estate on the bottle, which are not actually single estate, almost all of them. But to us, that's a great indicator that we've done something right, that the market is now following us in terms of trying to demonstrate terroir in tequila and using terms like single estate. So we're very pleased with that, with how Ocho's done.
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm going to digress again. I mean, for those watching at home, what happens every week when I do this is I send the guests some questions ahead of time and then immediately move off them and delve very deep because I start to get geeky with things. But two questions actually kind of occurred to me there. First one was, I know that kind of there's a bit of a family love affair with Burgundy in particular, is it, in France? So was that part of the inspiration for the single farm idea, or was it kind of part of, the tequila making thought, if it hadn't been kind of marketed and bottled, or was it kind of taking that inspiration from the wine world and the single vineyard and the terroir side of things?
Yeah, again, you know, great question, Simon. And I know that you've been to a few of our tastings before. But you know, my father, the co-founder, along with Carlos Camarena, who's the master distiller of Tequila Ocho, for I think it was 19 consecutive years, and then even more that were not kind of consecutive, let's say, but from the late 80s into the late 90s, my dad was an absolute lover of Burgundy wines, and he just would love to go down there once a year for the en primeur tastings. And of course, he'd buy some wine too, just for personal consumption. But he just loved going down and seeing the wine producers and seeing the vineyards himself, and was fascinated to the point of obsession in some cases about this idea of terroir. And in Burgundy, I would call it micro terroir, because you can be in the same exact vineyard and you can see the change in soil, you can see it visually, and you can smell the difference in soil, and you can taste the difference, you know, that chalkiness, that minerality that we get in Burgundy can vary so much within one single vineyard. So my dad always wondered how that would apply to tequila. So when it came time to produce Tequila Ocho with Carlos about 15 years ago, that was one of the first questions from my dad was, could we do a single field concept with tequila in the same way that wines do it with single vineyard wines? And Carlos, you know, had not really considered that necessarily, but he said, of course, absolutely, we can do this. We own all of our own fields. His family own all of their own fields. In fact, they produce more agave than they need for their tequila production, so they will sell that on the open market. So it was a serendipitous. Very few producers can say that. In fact, I think it's probably, you know, maybe 3 or something like that in the industry now. It's certainly, you can count on one hand. So that was very fortuitous that was an idea that my dad had, and that there were the capabilities to actually do that.
The other thing that occurred to me when you were speaking about the single farm stuff there was, you know, from kind of the concept of me seems to be if you harvest from 25 different fields, you taste them side by side, and you realize that one field might, as you say, be more floral, one might be more vegetal. Does that then lead to a reverse engineering of the process where you either try and cultivate or at least look for certain soils to then create certain styles of tequila?
Yeah, again, another great question, Simon. And I've had that a couple of times before. We are not that kind of, so one of the philosophies that we really embrace with Tequila Ocho is called slow food. It's a kind of a philosophy or a movement out of Italy that really is the opposite of fast food. So, taking our time to produce things, moving away from this like mass production mindset of, and going to Mackie D's in Edinburgh and then in London and then in Paris, it's all going to taste the same, right? Whereas, if we were going to go out to an orchard or something and to pick different fruits or apples or whatever they might be, we'd see that actually the two apples we've picked have different weights, different sizes, different appearances, different sugar content, different acidity levels. Those nature produces those in different ways. And what we really love doing is, again, we borrow a lot from I'm borrowing heavily from the wine world here, but kind of minimal intervention or low intervention, right? Because what we want to do is produce it in the best way possible, in a way that highlights that agave flavor as much as possible, but really kind of stand back and let the agave express itself from each field and let it shine through, rather than say, yeah, we want this next batch to be a bit more mineral or whatever it is, and we're going to use agaves from this type of soil. We just say, this is the next field we're going to harvest, and however these agaves express themselves is how, the tequila is going to taste. And to us, that's great fun as well.
It's really interesting. I mean, you would think the temptation would be to use that knowledge to introduce a control method, but really just happy enjoying and kind of experiencing what the soil and the ground and the natural terroir delivers to you.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I'm going to kind of get vaguely back on track here to the rough running order we had. I mean, you're obviously you're part of a tequila family. You're part of a family-owned tequila brand, and a kind of very original one, and as you say, one that's very connected to where it's from, as well as being a global ambassador. You are not only a brand ambassador, you are by inherently a category ambassador. Tequila is something that you promote in all forms, and obviously believe hugely in. As part of someone forwarding the category and kind of bringing awareness about it, what would you like to see in the future? Where would you like to see agave end up, and tequila especially long term? I mean, what are you kind of working towards as part of that agave and tequila family?
Yeah, thanks again, Simon, for all these questions. So my father, before founding Ocho, was and still is a category an official, one of two official category ambassadors for tequila from the Mexican government to the European Union. And his counterpart, and this fits in nicely with the drink you have in your hand, is Julio Bermejo for North America, who's the creator of this absolutely beautiful drink. And I think it's going to be the answer to one of your next questions as well. Just one of my favorite cocktails of all time, the Tommy's Margarita. So he's been working with tequila in Europe since the mid 70s, since about 1976. So 45 years this year, actually, really promoting the category. And, so I very much share that philosophy and kind of that approach to, I think it's quite boring as well, having worked in hospitality for many years, that, I don't want to hear a rep come in and just talk to me about their brand and why it's the best and why it's the greatest. It's much more interesting to actually talk about the category. And then you can contextualize that and say, this is how Ocho fits in. This is what makes it unique. And I think that's much more interesting from that standpoint as well. In terms of changes I'd like to see, when I look back over the last 10 or even 15 years in Europe, and let's take the UK as an example, I really have seen that we've kind of driven this message. Not so much my father and I, but what I've seen in the industry is like kind of introducing consumers to 100% agave tequila and saying, what, maybe it's better to stick with 100% agave than to be drinking regular tequila, right? Which can have up to 49% of other sugars in the formulation, so prior to fermentation. So it could be, in some ways people consider it kind of half rum if it's from sugarcane, or, it can be from corn, high fructose corn syrup. So not to say that all regular tequilas are bad and all 100% agave tequilas are good, but I think that was the message, the primary message over the last 15 years. What I'd like to see is more of a movement towards actually 100% agave is not necessarily an indicator of quality, and just to look a little bit deeper into that, to look a bit deeper into the production practices. How sustainable is it? Are they using things like the diffuser, which is kind of controversial, and and things like additives as well. But I guess, what I'm coming to, what I'd really like to see is more transparency, is more kind of inquisitive consumers, which I'm already seeing a lot, especially in the United States, and more transparency on the part of producers, which again, for a lot of producers historically has really lacked that element of transparency in my view. So that's what I'd like to see. Yeah. On both sides of that kind of equation.
And does that transparency need to come from home? I mean, is that part of kind of regulations in Mexico and in production, or is that kind of in places like the UK and Europe being a kind of the ability to label tequila differently over here and lack transparency, or is it kind of a bit of both? Do we just need a bit of global regulation on how you market your tequila?
The global regulation is actually fairly good, because they have to, Europe or whoever it is, whether it's the EU, the UK, have to conform to the same regulations that they have in Mexico in terms of the CRT, the Tequila Regulatory Council, will create all those regulations. And I think at this point there was like fake tequila and things like that, and there still is, but much less so in the last several years. So I think really it's about, the producers. And also I think whenever there's pressure from consumers, if consumers say, well, I'm not going to drink this because it lacks transparency, I think that's a very good motivation for producers to actually say, well, yeah, we need to be more transparent here. But it has to start with the producers, and maybe with some pressure from us, the consumer.
As with everything, I guess it's a two-way building street between those making it and those buying it. So to move on to one of my favorite questions, and I'm kind of really, really looking forward to your response here, because as I say kind of every week, we've all had some really interesting and unusual experiences that are kind of really only because we work in and around the drinks industry, and some kind of, we end up in strange and weird places, but it's always a lot of fun. Normally, for in the whiskey world, we end up in some far-flung distillery being very, very cold, and by a fire somewhere. In tequila, I'm sure the average climate and experience is slightly different. So for you, what's your favorite kind of drinks-related memory?
I'm gonna throw in two, but they're both take place in bars, because I don't know, we spend a lot of time in bars, I guess. So
We used to.
Yeah, we used to. That's a good point. Hopefully we will again soon.
And we will again, yeah.
Hopefully soon. But yeah, Tommy's, again, to go back to the drink in your hand, is just Tommy's Mexican Bar and Restaurant, which off the top of my head was opened in 1965 by Julio's father, Tomas, or Tommy, and by his family. And it's just, I don't know, Julio's hospitality is just unparalleled. I mean, and again, having been to so many bars, there's just nothing like Tommy's bar when Julio's there hosting someone. It's just a wonderful experience. So that's, drinking Tommy's in Tommy's Mexican Bar and Restaurant, and drinking, some amazing tequilas. I think he's got it like a warehouse somewhere, probably in the Bay Area near San Francisco, full of vintage tequilas. So tequilas from the 80s, 90s, maybe even from the 70s, just older tequilas, and he brings those into Tommy's and does these kind of vintage tastings that are super, super cool. So I mean, that to me is pretty high up there. And then of course, back when Don Javier was still alive, rest in peace, there's a bar called La Capilla, and the owner for many years there was Don Javier, who's, I mean, to us in the tequila world, is just a legend. He's passed now recently, but very much a living legend when he was alive. And he started bartending in 1945. And I mean, until, you know, a couple of years ago, he was still behind the bar, right? You know, on some regular basis, mixing up drinks. And, you know, to think that, you know, his career as a bartender spanned what, 70 years is just very impressive. And he was a magical person as well, and just an incredible host. So um yeah, those would be my two favorites off the top of my head.
Sounds amazing. And just one quick one before we get to the crux of the issue, the Desert Island Drams. One of the most common questions I get asked after doing any kind of trainings and presentations is, especially from kind of younger bartenders, what books would you recommend on whiskey or cocktails or whatever? Is there any are there any books on tequila or agave that you would really recommend someone who wants to just, as a jumping off point into the category?
Oh man, yeah, definitely. Off the top of my head, well, I'll plug my dad's book, The Tequila
Sure,
Ambassador,
may as well.
by Tomas Estes. So, you know, that's a great place to start, and it's quite fun as well. It's not so dry and just it's more story based. And yes, there's a lot of information in there, but it's also a lot of his stories working with tequila over several decades. You know, Lucinda Hutchinson's written a great book. I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head. Bob Amons. There's quite a few good ones. You know, what I would really recommend is, if you're in the UK, especially, but you can be anywhere in the world, there's a great Facebook group called the UK Tequila Mezcal Agave group. And within that, there's a document that we've all put together, contributed as a group. It's a reading list essentially for tequila. So you can access that through Facebook. But yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know. There's some good books out there for sure about tequila. I just can't pull up the names right now.
Again, that's me going off on tangents, but I'm not part of that Facebook group, but I will be within 3 minutes of finishing this this recording. So let's go on to it. So Desert Island Drams. So you can take three liquids, ever refilling bottles of 3 different liquids to a desert island. We can assume that you've got a lime tree nearby and some sort of sugary situation. So you can make a margarita or a Tommy's while you're there. So if you were to end up on a desert island, what three drams would you want to take with you, Jesse?
When you say drams, whiskey, or it can be any?
No, any liquid you like. I mean, I assume you'd want to take some tequila, but if there's a whiskey in there, so much the better.
Yeah, what would I take? I'd take my favorite batch of Ocho, my favorite harvest of Ocho was the 2008 Las Palmas. So if I can have a steady supply of that, I'd definitely take that with me. And again, I can make margaritas with that one. And I think, like you said, if I have access to, you know, something to make daiquiris, I do love, you know, I love rum. It's a tropical island. So I'd probably do something like, you know, Plantation 3-Star, which I just think is delicious in cocktails. And then I definitely want a dark sipper. So I'd probably take, oh, I know what I'd take. I'd take one of our new Barrel Select range, which is very limited, very limited edition. But again, we do a Barrel Select Tropical, which is a blend of different rum barrels from Maison, which is just absolutely delicious. So, you know, tropical island rum, you know, tequila finished in rum barrels, or aged in rum barrels, sorry. So, you know, I think that would be it, probably.
That makes sense. I remember last time I saw you, maybe the time before, trying something that it was actually a cognac barrel from Mason that it was absolutely exceptional. You know, as when you try something like that, you kind of see all tequila can be beyond some of the immediate. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for your time and for bearing with me while I tangentialize the entire conversation beyond anything I prepared you for. But it's been lovely to see you, and I mean, I hope we can share a dram soon enough once you're back in this country and either in London or in Edinburgh when you're up. But man, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was really interesting. I could go on for hours just enjoying talking about things that I don't really know about. But I'll let you get on with your day. Thanks for your time, mate. And look, I'll hopefully see you soon. Cheers, mate.
Likewise. Cheers. Cheers, Simon. Thanks, brother.